Before we dive in, I want to ask you something. Which country are you watching this video from? Drop it in the comments. I'm really curious to see where you're all tuning in from. And if you find this kind of content valuable, make sure to like, share this video with someone who needs to hear this, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss what's coming next. Now, here's the truth most men never hear. Attraction isn't about age, looks, or even money in the way you think. In fact, men over 60 who understand a few hidden psychological triggers often become more irresistible than ever, while most younger men are completely wasting their advantage. Let's get started. There's a moment in every man's life when he realizes that what he's been told about attraction isn't entirely true. It's not just about youth, appearance, or trying harder than everyone else. In fact, the harder most men try, the more invisible they become. And somewhere along the way, a quiet shift happens, usually later in life, where some men stop chasing, stop proving, and unexpectedly become more attractive than ever before. What changes isn't the outside. It's something much deeper. One of the most powerful shifts is emotional self-sufficiency. Most men spend years seeking approval, adjusting their behavior, their words, even their personality to be liked. But when a man reaches a point where he no longer needs validation, something subtle yet powerful happens. He becomes grounded. His presence feels stable, not reactive, and this stability sends a quiet signal, one that doesn't need words. It tells others that he is in control of himself, that he isn't dependent on external reactions to define his worth. And that kind of energy is rare. Closely connected to this is how he uses his attention. Attention is one of the most undervalued psychological currencies. Younger men often give it away too freely, constantly available, always responding, always trying to maintain interest. But when attention becomes predictable, it loses its impact. Men who have learned to be selective with their time and focus create a completely different dynamic. Their presence feels intentional, not automatic. And when something is not constantly available, the mind naturally assigns it more value. It's not manipulation, it's simply how human perception works. Then there's the difference between loud confidence and calm energy. Most people confuse confidence with performance, speaking louder, acting bolder, trying to dominate a room. But real confidence doesn't need to announce itself. It's controlled, steady, almost quiet. A man who has learned to regulate his emotions doesn't react impulsively, doesn't get pulled into unnecessary tension, and doesn't feel the need to prove anything. This calmness creates a sense of safety, but also curiosity. Because when someone is not easily shaken, it makes others wonder what's beneath the surface. Over time, life itself becomes an advantage. Experience isn't just about age, it's about how a person carries what they've lived through. There's a difference between someone who is simply aged and someone who has reflected, learned, and grown. That difference is felt immediately, even if it's not consciously understood. People are naturally drawn to those who seem to understand life beyond the surface. It creates a sense of trust, not because of what is said, but because of how it feels to be around them. There's less uncertainty, less chaos, and more depth. Another shift that changes everything is detachment from outcome. When a man is overly focused on a specific result, whether it's approval, attention, or a desired reaction, his behavior becomes tense, subtly forced. But when that attachment disappears, his interactions become lighter, more natural. He listens more, reacts less, and allows moments to unfold instead of trying to control them. This creates space. And in that space, genuine connection has room to grow. It's a paradox. When you stop trying to make something happen, it often happens more easily. And perhaps the most defining trait is having a clear sense of purpose. Not something surface level, but something deeply rooted. A direction that isn't dependent on others' opinions or temporary emotions. When a man is aligned with something meaningful, it shapes how he moves, how he speaks, and how he makes decisions. There's a quiet certainty in him. And that certainty is compelling because it reflects clarity, something many people are still searching for. It shows that his life is not centered around chasing attention, but around building something that matters to him. All of these shifts share one common thread. They move a man away from seeking and into being. From trying to become attractive, to naturally embodying traits that are attractive without effort. And what makes this so powerful is that it's not about changing who you are on the surface. It's about removing the layers of insecurity, overcompensation, and constant need for approval that were never meant to define you in the first place. In the end, attraction isn't something you force. It's something that emerges when your mindset changes, when your energy becomes steady, and when your focus shifts inward instead of outward. And the men who understand this don't just become more attractive over time, they become more at peace with themselves. And that changes everything. Most men spend their entire lives trying to become attractive, without ever realizing that attraction was never something they had to chase in the first place. It's something that quietly forms when a man stops performing and starts understanding himself on a deeper level. There's a strange shift that happens with certain men over time. Not louder, not flashier, just different. While others are still trying to impress, they begin to withdraw from that need entirely. And in that withdrawal, something unexpected happens. They become more noticeable than ever. It starts with emotional independence. When a man no longer looks for approval in every interaction, he changes the entire dynamic without saying a word. There's no subtle pressure in his presence, no hidden need to be accepted. And people can feel that because most interactions in life are driven by hidden expectations. When those expectations disappear, the energy becomes lighter, but at the same time, more powerful. It's no longer about trying to win someone over, it's about simply being. And then there's the way he treats his attention. Most people don't realize that attention isn't just politeness, it's value. When it's given too freely, it becomes invisible. But when it's intentional, when it's controlled, it carries weight. A man who doesn't rush to give his time, who isn't always available, naturally creates a sense of importance around his presence. Not because he's playing a game, but because he understands that not everything deserves his energy. What makes this even more interesting is how calmness replaces the need to prove confidence. There's a big difference between someone who acts confident and someone who simply is. The one who acts needs reactions, needs acknowledgement. The one who remains the same, regardless of what's happening around him. His voice doesn't need to rise. His body language doesn't need to dominate. There's a steadiness to him that feels almost unshakable. And that steadiness draws attention in a way that loud behavior never can. With time, life itself begins to shape a different kind of presence. Not just experience, but understanding. There's a depth that comes from seeing how things unfold, from learning what actually matters and what doesn't. This kind of awareness creates a quiet confidence that isn't built on theory, but on reality. And people instinctively trust what feels real. They may not be able to explain it, but they feel it. Then comes one of the most overlooked shifts, the ability to let go of outcomes. When a man stops needing a specific result from every interaction, his behavior changes completely. He becomes more relaxed, more present, more observant. There's no tension in his words, no urgency in his actions. And without that pressure, the interaction feels natural, almost effortless. It allows the other person to engage freely without feeling like they're being pulled in a certain direction. And finally, there's purpose. Not the kind that's talked about for motivation, but the kind that actually guides decisions. A man who knows where he's going doesn't get distracted easily. His time, his energy, his focus, they all align with something meaningful. And that alignment shows. It creates a sense of direction that's hard to ignore. Because in a world where many people feel lost, clarity stands out. All of this comes together in a way that most people don't expect. It's not about becoming someone new. It's about removing the unnecessary layers, the need to impress, the habit of overgiving, the constant search for validation. And what remains is something far more natural, far more grounded. Because in the end, attraction isn't built through effort alone. It's shaped by mindset, by emotional control, and by the ability to stand firmly within yourself without needing anything from the outside. And when that happens, everything changes. There's a quiet truth most men never hear, not because it's hidden, but because it's uncomfortable. Attraction doesn't respond to effort the way you think it does. In fact, the more a man tries to prove himself, the more he subtly communicates that he's still searching for something outside of himself. And people can feel that, even if they can't explain it. But then there are men who reach a different stage. Not necessarily older in years alone, but deeper in understanding. They move differently, speak less but say more. They're not trying to capture attention, yet attention finds them anyway. And the reason lies in something most people completely overlook, the psychology of presence. It begins with a simple but powerful shift, no longer needing to be liked. Think about how much of human behavior is shaped by this invisible desire, adjusting your tone, your words, your reactions, all to maintain a certain image. But when a man steps out of that cycle, when he no longer measures his worth through other people's responses, something changes at the core. His energy stabilizes. He becomes less reactive, more centered. And this creates a sense of certainty around him that others are naturally drawn to. From there, his relationship with attention transforms. He no longer treats it as something to give freely in hopes of receiving something back. Instead, he becomes intentional. Present when it matters, distant when it doesn't. And this balance creates a subtle tension, one that pulls people in. Because the human mind is wired to notice what isn't constantly available. What feels limited automatically feels more valuable. Then there's the way he carries confidence. Not the kind that needs to be displayed, but the kind that exists quietly. There's no rush in his movements, no urgency in his speech. He doesn't interrupt, doesn't over-explain, doesn't try to fill every silence. And that silence becomes powerful. Because in a world full of noise, someone who is comfortable with stillness stands out without trying. As time passes, life begins to shape a deeper awareness. Experiences, both good and bad, start to form a kind of internal clarity. He understands patterns. He sees beyond surface-level behavior. And this gives him an edge that isn't visible, but is always felt. People sense that he's not easily confused, not easily misled. And that sense of grounded understanding creates a natural trust. Another shift happens in how he approaches outcomes. There's no longer a need to control every situation or steer every interaction toward a specific result. He allows things to unfold. And this changes everything. Because when there's no pressure, no hidden agenda, the interaction becomes real, authentic. And authenticity is rare enough to be immediately noticeable. This lack of pressure also gives him something most people don't have: freedom in how he expresses himself. He can be direct without being aggressive, playful without being insecure, honest without fear of losing approval. And that freedom creates a dynamic where the interaction feels alive, not forced. And at the center of all of this is purpose. Not something temporary or borrowed, but something deeply personal. A direction that doesn't shift based on opinions or trends. When a man is aligned with his purpose, it reflects in everything he does. His decisions become clearer. His time becomes more valuable. His presence becomes more focused. And that focus sends a message without words that his life is already full, already meaningful. What makes this so powerful is that none of it relies on external factors. It's not about appearance, status, or trying to outcompete others. It's about internal alignment. When a man is no longer divided within himself, when his actions, thoughts, and direction all point the same way, he becomes naturally compelling. And the irony is, this is often realized later in life, after years of doing the opposite. After trying too hard, giving too much, and seeking too often, only to discover that the real shift was never about adding more, but about letting go. Letting go of the need to impress. Letting go of the fear of not being enough. Letting go of the constant chase. Because when those things fall away, what remains is something steady, something real, something that doesn't need to ask for attention to receive it. And that is where everything begins to change. There comes a point where a man begins to notice something unsettling, that everything he thought would make him attractive isn't working the way he expected. The effort, the attention, the constant need to say the right thing, it all starts to feel forced. And deep down, there's a quiet realization forming: maybe attraction was never about trying so hard in the first place. Because the truth is, people don't respond to what you say as much as they respond to what you are. And what you are is shaped by your internal state, not your external performance. Some men reach a stage where they stop chasing reactions, not because they've given up, but because they've understood something most people miss. The moment you need a reaction, you've already lost control of your own center. And control, not over others but over yourself, is where real presence begins. This is where emotional self-sufficiency quietly takes over. A man who no longer depends on approval carries a completely different energy. He listens without trying to impress. He speaks without trying to convince. There's no hidden urgency behind his words. And that absence of need creates a space that feels calm, but also powerful. Because most people are used to being around others who are subtly asking for something: attention, validation, reassurance. When that disappears, it stands out. And then something even more subtle happens. He becomes selective with his attention, not in a calculated way, but in a natural one. He no longer feels the need to respond instantly, to fill every silence, or to keep every interaction alive. And this changes how he's perceived. Because attention, when it's constant, becomes invisible. But when it's intentional, it becomes meaningful. It carries weight. There's also a shift in how he expresses confidence. It's no longer about being seen as confident, it's about being at ease with himself. He doesn't rush his words. He doesn't over-explain. He doesn't try to dominate the conversation. And yet, there's a quiet authority in how he carries himself. A sense that he's not easily moved, not easily shaken. And that steadiness creates curiosity. Because people naturally wonder what gives someone that level of calm. Over time, life refines this even further. Experiences shape perspective. Mistakes turn into awareness. Patterns become clearer. And this creates something deeper than confidence. It creates understanding. A man who understands life doesn't react to everything. He observes more, speaks less, and chooses his moments carefully. And that level of awareness makes his presence feel grounded, almost anchored. Then comes the shift that changes everything: detachment from outcome. When a man is no longer focused on where an interaction is going, he becomes fully present in where it is. There's no pressure in his tone, no hidden agenda in his behavior. And that absence of pressure allows the interaction to breathe. It becomes natural, fluid, real, because nothing is being forced. This also gives him a kind of freedom that most people don't experience. He can walk away without hesitation. He can stay without needing reassurance. He can express himself without filtering every thought through fear of judgment. And that freedom is felt immediately because it's rare. At the core of all of this is purpose. Not something he talks about constantly, but something that quietly guides him. His time is not empty. His direction is not unclear. He knows where he's going, even if the path isn't perfect. And that sense of direction creates a powerful contrast to the uncertainty many people carry within themselves. When all of these elements come together, something shifts in a way that's hard to describe but easy to feel. He's no longer trying to become attractive. He's no longer adjusting himself to fit expectations. He's simply aligned with his thoughts, his actions, and his direction. And that alignment removes the friction that most people live with every day: the overthinking, the second-guessing, the constant need to be something else. What remains is clarity, presence, control. And in that state, attraction is no longer something he has to chase. It's something that naturally follows. Because in the end, it was never about doing more. It was about becoming less of everything that wasn't real. At some point, a man begins to feel the exhaustion of trying to be seen. Not physically tired, but mentally drained from constantly adjusting, constantly calculating, constantly wondering if he's saying the right thing or doing enough to hold someone's attention. And what's strange is, the more effort he puts in, the less impact he seems to have. That's where the confusion begins. Because everything he was taught tells him to try harder. But real attraction doesn't respond to effort, it responds to energy. And energy changes when a man stops seeking validation. This is where everything quietly shifts. When there is no longer a need to be approved of, his behavior becomes cleaner, more direct, more real. There's no hidden agenda behind his actions. He's not speaking to impress, he's not acting to gain something in return. And that absence of need creates a presence that feels stable. Most people don't realize how rare that is. Stability, especially emotional stability, is one of the strongest signals a person can give without ever saying a word. Then there's attention, the invisible currency that almost everyone misuses. When attention is given constantly, without thought, it loses all value. It becomes expected, almost ignored. But when a man becomes selective, when he gives his time only where it feels right, something changes in how he's perceived. His presence becomes intentional, and intention creates weight. It makes people pause, notice, and engage differently. Not because he's trying to control anything, but because he's no longer giving everything away for free. What makes this even more powerful is the way calmness replaces performance. Most men are taught to show confidence in visible ways, to speak louder, to lead conversations, to dominate attention. But real confidence is much quieter. It's in the pauses, in the lack of urgency, in the ability to sit in silence without discomfort. A man who is calm under pressure, who doesn't react impulsively, who doesn't rush to fill every gap, carries a different kind of authority. It's not forced. It's felt. As life moves forward, experience begins to shape perception. Not just what a man has been through, but how he understands it. There's a difference between someone who has lived and someone who has learned from living. That learning creates depth. It changes how he sees people, how he interprets behavior, how he responds to situations. And that depth creates a quiet sense of trust. Because people instinctively feel when someone understands more than they say. Another powerful shift happens when the need for outcomes disappears. When a man is no longer focused on what he's going to get from an interaction, everything about his presence becomes lighter. There's no pressure in his tone, no tension in his behavior. He's not trying to steer things in a certain direction. He's simply present. And that presence allows things to unfold naturally. It creates a space where connection can happen without being forced. And that kind of space is rare enough to stand out immediately. This also gives him something that most people don't have: freedom. The freedom to walk away without hesitation. The freedom to stay without needing reassurance. The freedom to express himself honestly without filtering every thought through fear. And that freedom changes the entire dynamic. Because when someone is not afraid to lose, they no longer behave in a way that pushes things away. At the center of all of this is purpose. Not something loud or performative, but something steady. A direction that gives structure to his life. When a man knows where he's going, he doesn't get pulled into every distraction. His time becomes more valuable, his focus becomes sharper, and his presence becomes more grounded. There's a sense of alignment in him that others can feel, even if they don't fully understand it. And when all these elements come together, something shifts in a way that can't be faked. He's no longer trying to become attractive. He's no longer chasing attention or adjusting himself to fit expectations. He's simply operating from a place of clarity and control. And that's what most men miss. They think attraction is something you build by adding more effort, more words, more strategies. But the truth is, it's revealed when you start removing things. The need to impress, the habit of overgiving, the constant search for approval. Because once those things are gone, what remains is something steady, something real, something that doesn't need to ask for attention to receive it. And that's the moment everything changes. Most men don't realize they've been trained to chase, not connection, but approval. And the difference between the two is where everything changes. Because when you chase approval, you slowly lose your center. Your words become calculated, your behavior becomes reactive, and your presence becomes dependent on how someone else responds to you. And without noticing it, you stop being grounded in yourself. But there's a different path, a quieter one that usually isn't discovered early because it requires unlearning more than learning. And the men who find it don't look dramatically different, yet something about them feels undeniable. Not because they're trying to stand out, but because they've stopped trying to fit in. It begins with a shift in emotional dependence. When a man no longer needs to be liked, his entire presence changes. He doesn't enter conversations hoping to be accepted. He enters them as he is. There's no subtle tension behind his words, no hidden need behind his actions. And this lack of need is powerful, because most people are constantly trying to gain something from interactions. When that dynamic disappears, it creates a sense of calm that feels rare and real. Then comes the understanding of attention. Attention is not just something you give, it's something that defines how you're perceived. When it's constant, it becomes invisible. When it's selective, it becomes valuable. A man who understands this doesn't rush to respond, doesn't feel obligated to maintain every connection, doesn't give his time where it isn't respected. And without saying anything, he communicates that his presence has weight, that it's not something easily accessed or easily replaced. This naturally leads into a different form of confidence. Not the kind that demands recognition, but the kind that exists without it. He doesn't need to control conversations or prove his worth through words. He's comfortable with silence, comfortable with pauses, comfortable with not being the center of attention. And ironically, that's what draws attention toward him. Because in a world where everyone is trying to be heard, someone who doesn't need to be heard becomes intriguing. As time goes on, life begins to shape a deeper awareness within him. Experiences refine his thinking. Patterns become clearer. He starts to see beyond surface-level behavior and understands what drives people beneath it. And that understanding creates a presence that feels grounded. He doesn't react to everything. He doesn't get pulled into unnecessary emotional shifts. There's a steadiness to him that makes others feel both curious and at ease. Another major shift is the release of outcome-driven thinking. When a man is no longer focused on where things will lead, he becomes fully present in where they are. There's no pressure behind his actions, no urgency in his tone. He allows conversations to unfold naturally instead of forcing them in a certain direction. And this absence of pressure changes everything. It allows authenticity to surface. It creates an environment where connection can grow without resistance. And with that comes a kind of freedom that most people never experience. The freedom to walk away without second-guessing. The freedom to stay without needing reassurance. The freedom to express thoughts honestly without filtering everything through fear of judgment. This freedom is not loud, but it's deeply felt, because it reflects a man who is no longer controlled by external outcomes. At the core of all of this is purpose. Not something temporary or borrowed, but something deeply personal. A direction that anchors him. When a man is connected to his purpose, his time becomes structured, his energy becomes focused, and his decisions become clearer. He's no longer drifting. He's moving with intention. And that intention creates a sense of certainty that stands out in a world full of hesitation. When these elements come together, the transformation is subtle but undeniable. He's no longer trying to attract. He's no longer adjusting himself to be accepted. He's simply aligned. His thoughts, his actions, and his direction all move together without conflict. And that alignment removes the noise most people live with, the overthinking, the need for validation, the constant internal tension. What remains is clarity, control, presence. And when a man reaches that state, attraction is no longer something he seeks. It becomes something that naturally follows him.